Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And when it comes to news, I kind of want to quickly mention some real world news, of course, as we have another rover that has successfully landed on Mars. Perseverance, I think it's called. I think that's really cool stuff. I like it when we see space exploration for us go in the right direction. So really cool that that's successful, and I hope to see some cool stuff from that little rover that's also on Twitter and things like that. I think that's really cool how open they are compared to a lot of like other government programs and things like that. Next up, we get EVE Online news. Well, not that much to report, but I think some pretty interesting news is that the Marauders are getting a big buff. So I still have to look into that into detail, but maybe time for me to finally go for that golem and try to get that puppy up and running. I think. For most of them, it's really only a buff to the special mode that they have, the Bastion mode that the Marauders have. Could be interesting, so definitely I'm going to take a closer look at that when I find the time. And next to that, for EVE Online, we also have the economic report for January that came out. Again, I'm a little bit strapped for time personally, but I did read the Reddit thread when that came out, and some of the interesting numbers, of course, coming through from the war. All of that destruction that was happening there is finally showing up on the charts as well. And I thought one interesting part of like a big comment at first that gave a little bit of a synopsis and analysis on these economic numbers is that they shared my kind of I don't know, not really fully understanding why, but the weird situation where our mineral price index, which is really like underpinning a lot of the economy in EVE Online, is now at pretty much a one-year high point, but consumer prices have not really risen in that same way. So I do still think that there is this deflation versus inflation debate fight going on in the game in general, and that it's not really certain where it is going. Now let's also take a quick look at the New Eden store and see what's happening over here before we get started. So the Heart Surge skins are still front and center. You can still get them if you are interested in those Valentine themed skins. And then down here I'm not spotting anything too special. Quick look at the services. We don't have any sales happening over there. So let's move on straight to the market. Let's get into some Plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 250. Like that. All right, and then let's get started with those Plex, and you can see a little bit more continued pressure as we were pulling down from 2.5 million on that average price, and now we are substantially below that price. In GTA itself, they are selling for just a little bit above 2.5 million. Buyers though have gone down to less than 2.4 million. So at the moment, the investments in Plex have gone down. That's in fact one of the latest comments that asked for, well, what's my expectation on this? I'm really not entirely sure at the moment. I thought that 2.5 million, right? We've seen that as a bottom a couple times before. It was able to be defended pretty easily, but now it's pretty clear that that trend has been broken and that those buyers are able to drive the price down to 2.4 million and below, which is pretty impressive. If we add in the Tranquility Trading Tower, lots of selling happening here, going to less than 2.5 million. Now I have also read that this perimeter Tranquility Trading Tower, or at least a trading tower somewhere, may become involved in the war or in some shenanigans. So perhaps there is a little bit of panic selling happening there as well at the moment. Buyers, yeah, also still below 2.4 million, so they are very careful. A little bit of a margin opening up, and to my surprise, it is on the downside, so more pressure on the price. So if we go back to that deflation-inflation analysis, I still hold that in general, a sandboxy and virtual economy like EVE Online should see inflation be the general trend, because this is a game, it's meant to be fun, so you should always be able to make more ISK than goes into the faucet. But there are, of course, in a complex game like EVE Online, forces that are also aligning with deflation, that are putting pressure on price of things, and everything is relative to the entire history of the game, and it must be said, of course, that at the moment we are in a resource scarcity phase, and I think the changes to nullsec to ratting there have really put a lot of deflationary pressure on prices because of course how much harder it is to get a lot of ISK done. The ticks have been nerfed, and then you've got the bank robberies. All of that stuff is really making it more risky and harder to do. As a result, yeah, ISK itself is becoming more valuable at the moment, and that is what's showing up in this decrease in the price of Plex. You've got a second part, of course, is that the mineral price index is at an all-time high, so that is sucking in a lot of ISK from the economy, which generally puts pressure on other stuff as a result of that. When there's hype on something, that tends to come at the cost of other stuff. And then finally, I really think we should not underestimate that one either. The fight against bots, I do think that CCP has been decently successful, and that stuff like actually putting in the dynamic bounty system and that extra risk for Raiders has also pushed back against how easy it was before to just put up a bot in nullsec, let it do the run all day and create massive amounts of ISK into the game. That aspect is also one that creates actually a deflationary pressure into the game. And so the real question, of course, is, well, that 2.5 million range here, is that a low price for Plex? Or when it comes to the active ISK creation, if that was really the only bucket of ISK going to Plex, is this actually a high price? And that's something that, I mean, I can't answer for you. So for the very longer term, I would say, yeah, sure, I do think that investing in Plex makes sense, because I do think that overall we will always see in any game more ISK be created by players than be destroyed. But it's definitely possible that the resource bonanza period with perhaps a great period for botting and all of that have created a high price for Plex because of all of the ISK that was available then, and now we're still in a correction phase from all of that. So for now, I've also said that in one of my videos, I'm not sure, and as a result my holdings are actually pretty spread out. I would say that I've got about a third in Plex, a third in ISK, and then a third in stuff for the full value of my character. That's really my tactic at the moment, because I don't have a good explanation, and then with small investments I try and take a little bit of advantage on swings on the market. But I'm both protected against inflation because I'm holding I think it's like 8,500 Plex at this point, and I'm also protected against deflation because I've got like 110 billion in the wallet, and everything above that I'm then willing to pour into stuff to also have that's potentially stuff going up in price and take advantage of that. That's really my method here at the moment, and my views on this. I can't give you an answer really. Where it's going, where is it going, I don't know, and I'm basically playing both black and red at the moment as evenly as possible. After that, we have the multiple pilot train certificate, really showing that pressure as well. Look at that, couple of days below 1.2 billion ISK. That's pretty damn impressive. 1.24 billion for the sellers, but buyers are below 1.2 billion, which means that from time to time, right, players do tend to lose patience and say, you know what, I'm just going to cash out on my trading certificate. I'd rather have the 1.2 billion now than have to wait and see what happens in the future, which I think is showing that, yeah, the market is not sure, just like I am, where all of this is going. Is this pressure going to continue for the foreseeable future, or are we going to finally start to pick back up in price? Will inflation take over again? And really, we're also a little bit dependent on what CCP is going to do. As I've said, I think if a nerf comes for another ISK faucet, it will be incursions. And that could be pretty major, and that could put a lot of deflationary pressure on the prices. If that doesn't happen, then perhaps a bottom formation may be in the works. But we're still definitely dependent on an unknown factor, which is what is CCP going to do. After that, we have our skill extractors that are, of course, following the Plex price very closely and are heading for 280 million, are definitely at a one-year low point at the moment. 279 for the sellers, 274 almost for the buyers. Just continuing to see that deflation take over at the moment, I would say, in the Plex category. and that should also translate in more pressure for the skill injectors. Yeah, with a bit of hesitation here. I find this to be pretty interesting. I've always said, or I've quite often said that Plex for me is really just hedge against inflation, right? If you want to bet on or if you want to protect your assets, the value of your efforts in the game from inflation, then you want Plex. The difference with the skill injector is that you also have a little bit of a gamble or a little bit of an uncertain, potentially more volatile aspect to it, because it is basically built out of Plex, which becomes skill extractors and which then becomes skill injectors. But there is also potentially this increased use for large skill injectors, which is of course a sudden need for skill points, and this can be triggered by, again, CCP intervention, but a lot of stuff can make that happen. New ships coming into the game, ship rebalancings, but also completely new stuff coming into the game that would require new skills will all of a sudden normally show a surge in demand for skill injectors. And so it has that double aspect. It has both a component that exists out of Plex and thus should protect you against inflation, which at the moment over the last year has not been the case. Of course, we've been in a deflationary cycle because of CCP's going after very big faucets of stuff. Let's call stuff also ISK and stuff just minerals, everything in general. And as a result, we've seen that general deflationary pressure in the economy. But, you know, we also have at the moment, I think, a very generous way that CCP is handling skill points. And so we're again at a 1-year low point. But that doesn't mean that a resurgence is not possible, of course. And so these large skill injectors at the moment are going for 632 million almost for the sellers, but 608, 609 for the buyers. Definitely a bit more margin again opening up on the downside, and that's putting pressure on the price. And look at this 1-year chart, of course, a pretty serious decline in value. Also a pretty big increase in affordability for this stuff. So there's always two sides to every story. For the small skill injector now, also seeing that pressure. Oh, and what I wanted to say actually for those large skill injectors is that you're seeing that hesitation and some volume spikes. So I do think that there are investors that are saying, I'm actually going to grab 1 or 2 large skill injectors as an investment and then see for the longer term, which is why sometimes you have little boosts in demand, and then sometimes also people that are dumping on expectations, and as a result you get a little bit more volatility, a little bit more of a seesaw movement, but the trend is clearly down to prices well below 650. So the small scale injectors, a little bit less of that jumpy behavior, but overall the pressure is showing up here as well. 127 million for the sellers and 123 for the buyers. After that we have our daily alpha injectors that are also now starting to just feel the pressure, unable to maintain that high point, which was really a counterbalance to the other skill injectors, but now we are breaking 40 million on the downside, 39.5 in fact for the first seller, and 32 million for the buyers. The buyers is going lower and lower in a pretty steady pace, seeing that they are able to find sellers that are willing to dump at almost any price. 32 million, that is pretty damn low on the chart. So the pressure is now basically starting to mount and show up through the entire segment, I would say, which looking back at it also sort of explains hypercores through that lens, right? I've been using it, trying to use it a little bit as like a gauge for general activity in the game, and I think here with the July slump and then the pickup in September, October, it felt like it was potentially correct here, but then throughout the entire war here we actually have declining price. So I'm going to say that that's going to be the deflationary pressure that we're seeing in Plex here as well start to show up in the hypercore market too, which means that something that felt cheap at 280,000 ISK through the summer is now going for 265, and buyers are in fact below 250,000 ISK. So at the moment it really does feel like the deflationary forces are winning out on the Plex category. Next up we have the minerals coming in at 1435. let us take a look at these. And actually, I think that outside of titanium that has recovered, basically, these high prices here were part or are part of the deflationary forces in other stuff. It's now so hard and actually really difficult to get a lot of minerals going that the economy for a lot of them is willing to pay a very nice price. As a result, all of that is flowing into the mineral market can no longer flow in Plex, in PI, in chips, in stuff itself. And I think it's actually a bit of that market functionality, you could say, that's keeping consumer prices in check. These high mineral prices are partly I think responsible for the cheap Plex prices at the moment, which I think is pretty damn cool in our sandbox economy. So here is titanium basically landing back on 6 ISK. Again, Tranquility Trading Tower, very interesting. Normally in the mineral market you don't see that much competition. In JITA it's going for 611, and then usually when you don't have the JITA filter you get maybe 1 or 2 sell order in the Tranquility Trading Tower, and then a lot of more stuff like this. 5, 4, 11 jumps out, but now I'm seeing dumping. I am seeing a little bit of panic selling, I think, happening in the Tranquility Trading Tower. I've read a post on the subreddit that there's like a pirate gang that's like, hey, we're gonna actually go to war, but they were paid off, and a lot of typical EVE stuff, which is really cool. And people may be trying to get rid of their holdings in that one, because if the Tranquility Trading Tower were to blow up, I mean, that's going to be, I think, the biggest kill mail ever in EVE Online. It would be kind of interesting if they could make that happen. Very cool stuff, in my opinion, but also part of the reason why I've done a little bit of buying there, but I've kept most of my stuff in JITA 4.4, which still for now NPC stations are a safe place. How long will that last? Who knows, right? CCP's has been loving increasing the risk, so don't want to give him ideas, but who knows what's gonna happen. And here is part of that pressure, right? Here is Pyrite jumping up from like 9, no, even less than that probably, what's the price, 7 ISK, and then jumping up to almost 20 ISK, and at the moment able to maintain that premium very nicely. 19 for the sellers, and in station, yeah, 1885, and then I should really put that filter on here as well. 1860 for the buyers, so super narrow margin, people willing and basically forced to pay that higher pyrite price, and thus forced to allocate a bigger part of their wallet to these minerals at the moment. And then we can continue. So titanium actually at 6 ISK is an historical average price. So here you could sell, you could buy. None of them are really mistakes from a historical perspective. I think it's an okay price, just not a great price. Once you get to 7, you can definitely sell, then you're getting a very good price. And anything above that, which we've been to on for most of the year, has been just an incredible period where you got so much stuff for your titanium. You should have sold anything you might at that point. For pyrite, we're basically now in that phase. Considering where we come from, getting almost 20 ISK is pretty damn impressive, like triple the price of just 6 months ago. And then next up here we get Mexalon, still plateauing above 125 as well, very expensive, actually 75-ish. I would say that's the historical average, so that's like almost a 50%, no, almost 100% premium on this one. 131 for the sellers, 124 for the buyers, and for high-sec miners, absolutely your focus. Try to mine stuff that has Mexalon in it, because that is really valuable. Your ISK per hour will go up quite substantially thanks to that. This is again a 1 year straight up chart, and all of this, the part below the chart, you could say, is just more ISK that has to be pumped into the Mexalon market if you want to make industry happen. After that, we've got Isogen, right? Still a little bit more hesitant on the growing. I've said it before, there is probably just old stocks that are still causing trouble here. For instance, a 1.9 billion unit seller at 45 that I was posted like 50 days ago is still basically keeping this price from going up towards the 50 range, but you can see that we're bouncing up against that price point again and again. So I do think that regular supplies for Isogen are not sufficient for the current output. It's just that people are still holding on to so much old Isogen that never found a use when it was so plentiful in mining, that it's still slowly finding its way into the market. People, of course, want the best possible price, and so from time to time that dries up and we bump up against higher prices. But we still have like billions of units to go through, unfortunately, and that is going to take some more time. Then we get another winner, which is Noxium. Look at that again, a plateau at a 1-year high point. You don't see that very often, and again, all of this below here, lots of ISK needed to get that Noxium trade to happen. Volumes have gone down a bit, but not by all that much. So this is a lot of extra ISK into the Noxium market that can't flow into Plex, can't flow into other stuff, and that again is that deflationary pressure. 1,375, almost 1,400. I would say that's also well above the historical averages for Noxium. 1,200 for the buyers as well. I mean, we've maybe seen peaks at this range before, but this is super expensive. So in low sec, right, if you can grab some Noxium, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck for your mining efforts. After that, we've got Zydrine. Let's take a look at that one. Also still going back up now, heading for 1,500 ISK. Yeah, 1,568, 1,360 for the buyer. So this to me also feels well above average at this point for even the historical perspective. So you've got that for Zydrine, for Mexilon, for Noxium. Yeah, all of this is of course pushing that mineral price index in general up, and I do think that now we may be we will perhaps start to really feel some pressure on like Tech 1 chip prices and things like that, because getting that Zydrine, very expensive, Nox as well, Mexilon as well, Tritanium is going to cushion that a little bit by still being in an okay range, but this really does feel like we're starting to plateau at even higher prices than I've basically ever seen, you know, maintained for a longer period of time. And I think that here, this could also start to like, you know, force more ISK into Tech 1 stuff in general, which is perhaps going to put even more pressure on Plex. So that could be a theory. We'll have to see, of course, what actually happens in the upcoming weeks and months. And then Megasite, also a little bit of a counter one that is still holding on at 600 ISK, which historically has actually been more expensive than Zydrine. 623 for the sellers, 588 for the buyers. I guess the usage of Megasite is just that much smaller at the moment that that this price is doable. And I think a comment also mentioned that there are sources of Megasite in like Triglavian space, so there's probably some extra supplies that are still finding their way to the market. And then of course, not tied to the Tech 1 economy, but definitely also putting that general pressure on prices by grabbing a lot of the ISK out of the economy all of a sudden, is Morphite. Since October, from 12,500, which was already a high historical price for Mexilon, for Morphite, excuse me, we just went up to Crazyville, 75,000. We're finally below that price range. So finally, you know, suppliers and people willing to risk trying to mine Morphite in dangerous space and able to do so, bring that to the market, is putting a bit of pressure on fresh supplies. 73,300 now for the sellers, 68,000 for the buyers. Look at these volumes though. Couple thousand units, a couple 10,000 units, all of a sudden that becomes really valuable. That's pretty amazing. And of course, this is also part of the mineral price index, so that's at I think a never before seen price for Morphite. So very, in my opinion, yeah, very cool stuff actually. That you know, miners out there, you could you know, take a risky trip and be lucky, find a nice source of Morphite and be able to bring that back. That is going to make you a lot of ISK in EVE Online at the moment. Next up, the PI market coming in at 23.55. And this one has, of course, been the biggest casualty, I would say, when it comes to those prices. I think generally, just, you know, I'm gonna say that again, but I think I'm right on that. CCP clearly said when the resource crunch happened over a year ago that part of their goal was to revalue effort in the game. and PI is one of the most passive things that you can do in the game, and that became the number one casualty pretty much for as when it comes to prizes for that one. And then of course we had this perfect storm for advanced PI materials, where the new cores came in for the structures, so there actually was less demand. I thought at first destruction would pick up, perhaps demand would pick up as well. That never really materialized, and we actually saw that a couple times here as well, with other investors thinking the same thing, buying, but then very quickly the prices keeping on degrading, and yeah, it's just that much harder to get a structure in EVE Online at the moment that prices haven't gone up. And at the tail end here we do see a little bit of a resurgence, for instance in broadcast nodes, and my personal opinion on that one is that this is a little bit of speculation on a tidbit announced by CCP, that they're looking at smaller structures to bring those to the game, to have an influence on like your personal surroundings, but not necessarily like system-wide or even region-wide or anything like that, which could be very interesting. And of course we could see advanced PI material become a part of that. So that's, I think, why we're seeing that resurgence. So for instance, broadcast node starts the year at 2 million, low point below 1 million, currently a little bit below 1.5 million, sellers are at 1.4. That is that story. For the rest of PI, yeah, it's the deflation, which especially here in October really picked up here, and you can see that construction blocks went down from 12k to 10k, which was already a pretty low average here, and then that second hit brought us down towards 7,000 disc, and it's still not stopping. Look at that, today's 5-day moving average pretty much below 7,000 already as well. 7,400 for the sellers, 6.8 for a couple of buyers. There just isn't the demand compared to the production. Consumer electronics is doing a little bit of a bounce, but it's more like a dead cat bounce really, from a 1-year low point below 6,250. That's like half the normal price for consumer electronics. 7,250 for the sellers, 6,700 for a couple of buyers. Again, not a lot of interest here. Coolants has just had a very bad year, coming from a great place. 12.5 for coolants was actually a little bit above average. A really nice price for a lot of these fuel-related PI materials, but then just the cycle started and we went down and down and down, and at the moment we lost like half the value here again. 6,000, more than half, at 6,000 for the sellers, 5.5 for a couple of buyers, and there just aren't that many buyers out there. And perhaps I should look at this as well. Yeah, so buyers in the Tranquility Trading Tower. This is a big part of how trading does happen because of the lower taxes there. You put up a buy order, you can do that from JITA, but within the Perimeter Trading Tower, but then make sure that you move enough out of there so that you don't get stuck if it gets blown up at some point. But that pressure, it's just really throughout almost the entire PI market. A couple of exceptions, like here, cryoprotectant solutions. Although this could look like deflation, this was actually a nice increase in price, double the price in a short period of time when CCP came out with new implant sets. So here now, able to stay above 100,000 disc is pretty impressive. I was looking to invest in that, hoping for a new implant set to come out below 100,000 disc. I never really got the chance. I mean, you can try to buy for like 99,000 now, but I would have loved to get like another 10-15% below that. It's 110 for the sellers, 98 for the buyers, and with these average prices there's not a lot of cryoprotectant solutions going to these buyers. Enriched uranium tied to fuel, so this again has that big pressure throughout the year. 6,800 for the sellers, 5,650 for the buyers. That's very cheap. Integrity response drones, advanced PI. So again, we have that increased price from a bottom range of almost 1 million ISK, which was like from 2.5 million. So that lost like, what is it, 75% of its price or something like that. That's definitely a very big decline. And so again, here I do think we get a couple of volume spikes. I think some players are stocking up on that advanced PI materials, hoping for small structures to become something that's more like, it needs advanced PI materials, but it's also really a throwaway structure that also has the necessary mechanics to perhaps be forgotten, and so that you get that nice consumption cycle of potentially smaller structures. This is, by the way, pure speculation on my part. I don't have any insider info or anything like that. Mechanical parts above 10,000 disc, holding on really well up until October, and really October was the time when the pressure was just throughout pretty much the entire economy. We saw that in a couple of other segments here as well. And now it's down to 7,000 discs, losing 30% of its value. 7,000 for the sellers, 6,700 for the buyers. A little bit better than some of the others, but it's definitely still a big decline. Nanites has that bump here, so that's tied to implants, able to stay above 5,000 discs, trying to at least. 5,500 for the sellers, 4,900 for the buyers. Same thing, if you're buying below 5k, I think that's okay. And then if CCP comes out with an implant set, you're looking pretty damn good. Nano factories tied to advanced PI, so tied to structures here again. A little bit, smaller in range, you could say, a more narrow range between 1.5 million and 500,000 discs. That's still a pretty big decline towards the low points. Then here we have that resurgence, but the first one where a little bit of supply is starting to put that pressure right back on the price. Still 784,000 for the sellers, 745 for the buyers. So that's a narrow margin, showing at least some support around the 750 range. Organic mortar applicators, again a little bit of a bounce from a 1-year low point. It's that same story again for advanced PI. Recursive computing modules, same thing here, with this one exception, you could say, this one big purchase that drove the price up to 1.25 million already in December. Someone really taking a very big position here, which was apparently a bit too early, because then right away new supplies were starting to put pressure back on the price. So during this almost a month, I would say, whoever did this purchase probably was starting to sweat, because that was starting to be quite a losing proposition. But here at the tail end we get a little bit of demand coming back, and he's probably practically breaking even now and looking at least some profit on the first half, you could say, of this increased price here on these purchases. Next up, we've got the robotics tied to fuel, so that's again a big pressure story. In fact, starting the year at 90k is already like 10% below its normal price. Now we're basically just trying to defend 60,000 disc, 65 for the sellers, 57,000 for the buyers, so they want to go even lower as always. Self-harmonizing power cores, these are, let's take a look at that, advanced PI, so again reaching bottoms of around 1 million and just below. Not that much of a resurgence, but there's a bit more demand to see here. Sterile conduits also flat at a much lower range. Then we get our Yukomi superconductors that had like the biggest volatile spike when CCP came out with more implants. So that was really very nice. In fact, like a 150% gain over here in a short amount of time. I was again looking to buy below 50,000 disc, and it just never materialized. So this is another one that has actually done surprisingly well to be able to stay at 71,000 for the sellers and 64,000 pretty much for the buyers. And then the wetware mainframes able to stay above 125, at least for the sellers, 1,350,000, buyers at 1.1 million though. Still not a lot of demand, and I think that those people that have invested or started investing in advanced PI materials, I hope that they followed my advice of always, buy in like small chunks, never really put in like a massive amount of stuff that's going to be hard and that's actually going to start moving the market. I'm more for a slower approach, smaller increments, so that you can still buy later down the line if prices go even lower, which I think for advanced PI materials, I mean, if CCP doesn't come out with news on small flex-like structures, then you could be holding these advanced PI materials for a very long time. After that, advanced mode materials, 3330. Let's take a look at what's happened. But first, I'm actually going to drink a bit. Starting to dry up here. Like that. So let's go for crystalline carbonite tied to the Galente production cycle. A bit of pressure at the tail end here, but basically still in its wavy cycle between a good price of 162 and then a low price of 125, 140 actually at the latest bottoms. 154 for the sellers, 142 for the buyers. So a bit of a margin that opens up from time to time on less supply and perhaps more buying as well. look at that, a little bit more buying that's happening in the last couple of days, probably gonna start boosting the price back up. After that, we've got not metamaterials, we need the carbides. Here we go, titanium carbide for Caldari, continuing its volatile cycle. And what's very interesting here is that our second leg up starts at 175 and above average price. So Caldari ships will probably still be very expensive at the moment. 226 for the sellers, 215 for the buyers. Very, very expensive stuff. Right here, and the king of volatility in advanced PI materials in the last couple of months has definitely been the Caldari segment. Then we got Minmatar, which is right here, Fernite carbide, that has a little bit of volatility, but in a different way. A couple of war spikes, right, because of the Imperium using a Minmatar Tech 2 cruiser as part of their main doctrine. We had a couple of very big spikes when the war started, but here we've got that volatility, but we also have that lower range. Whereas in the first part of this chart, whenever we got to 125, the market said, hey, that's low enough. Lots of people started buying, and then when a big alliance came in, you got these lovely spikes, so that made it tradable. But after that, here we do have these lower bottoms that are now slowly starting to make their way back up, but then the peaks are also declining. So for Minmatar, we do still have volatility, but we were at a lower range, and it may seem actually to me like we are recovering from that at the cost of volatility. 147 for the sellers, 143 for the buyers. You can see that right away, right? Much more narrow margin that will make it harder for big spikes to happen in general. I mean, it can still happen, but you basically need big volumes to really move that price in the same way as the Caldari one is moving at the moment, for instance. And then we've got our reverse situation. Compared to that, the Amar ones have just not shown any volatility. And have just moved to that lower range, period. Right above 175 for the first half of this chart, then hesitating, sometimes below for longer stretches of time, and then here again that October-November period where I think deflation just hit us hard, and this one was one of the big casualties, down to a low point of 125, and really not able to make a comeback. Between 125 and 150 is where we have been. We did see a volume spike here, but so far, to my surprise, as we have started to see a little bit of volatility in the ships, I haven't seen volatility here in the tungsten carbide market. 135 for the sellers, 124 for the buyers, right in the middle of this new lower range, and just not budging at all. Cool. All right, very different behaviors for what are actually similar types of products. After that, we have our metamaterials. As always, we start with the Galente photonic metamaterials. Now let's try and get the highest peak to be the highest part of the chart. Here, a little bit of a different story. Still a little bit of volatility, a wavy behavior, but definitely moving up towards that 12,500-ish range, trying to come back towards a more normal average price. 12.8 for the sellers, 11.9 almost for the buyers. Just a slow seesaw move up here for Galente, and so not that much volatility, just a little bit, and definitely a lower range here as well that is trying to make a comeback. For the non-linear metamaterials, for Caldari, if we get that those spikes, that's a lot better when you're looking for trading volatility and opportunities. We basically have a range between 25,000 and 17.5, and we actually have quite a big spikes happening quite often here. So this is a very interesting chart, right? If you're able to time this market a little bit, buy below 20, sell above 25, that's of course the dream. That is potentially what can happen, and a couple of people will always do that if the chart can actually make this move, but this is where there does exist potential. I mean, that's a 25% increase, that's not bad. And then down here we actually went below 20,000 and almost hit 25 as well. So again, another trade, It's that volatility that makes potentially trading very interesting. At the moment, we're back under pressure, back on the 20,000 ISK range. In fact, sellers below 20k, but the buyers have, I think, gone wise to this, and they're a bit more aggressive now. 19.3 for those sellers, right? If you would be able to like buy below 19,000 ISK, then of course, great. Look at that chart. That would be a very nice place to step in. But I think there's just a little bit more competition now, as you know, people have noticed all of that volatility. Then we get our plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar. We basically had that one war spike again, and then most of the first part of the chart above 20,000 ISK, again that hesitation, and then moving down to more of 15k range. And then here, I think this was a war spike though here again, with a data point like this, and now we're basically recovering back towards that lower range. 19,000 for the sellers, yeah, 17,000 for the buyers. That's basically that lower range starting to come back. So here, not as much volatility as in the base material that we just saw before, and basically the war, the alliances make up a really the only aspect that's going to really create volatility in the plasmonic metamaterials. And then finally for Amar, terahertz metamaterials, we're starting, this was what gave us a little bit of hope here, as we basically again had above 20k, then a little bit of volatility you could say, but the trend was clearly down to 12,500. It's losing almost 50% of its value here, and then trying to get back to 15,000, and I was basically like, all right, this looks like the new range. And then about 10 days ago or so, we had this surprise spike up to 20k that's already being plugged very quickly. 18,000 now for the sellers, 16,000 for the buyers, but at least we have our first small wave, our first attempt to get higher prices and some volatility back in the Amar segment, which you know, we'll see if that translates to anything on the ships. But for now, in the base one, yeah, it's just not happening. It's still very, very flat in that low range. After that, for advanced moon materials, we still have some other stuff. And all right, another turnaround here. Fermionic condensates definitely making a bit of a move up above 75,000 ISK. Look at these volumes. So that again, to me, feels like investment. Right, some people saying I'm gonna buy fermionic condensates and I'm gonna sell it at a higher price later down the line. I'm expecting this to start to turn around. 74,000 for the sellers and almost 74 for the buyers as well. Also, you know, a couple of days of higher volumes I think have basically forced those buyers into that higher range as well. Bit of a comeback from again that lower range. So the rest of advanced PI materials have generally suffered the same as PI. Advanced movements, excuse me, have generally suffered the same as PI, just that deflationary pressure that has shown through. And here now we're starting to see a little bit of volatility, a couple of attempts to go back up here. In fact, even on regular volumes, you have one that went from 30,000 to like probably 37,000 or something like that. But then that pressure does come back very quickly, right? People notice that, and then they've got stocks ready or supply lines are taking advantage of these higher prices. 33k for the sellers, 31.6 for the buyers. Well, it's away from the bottom, but it's definitely trading at a low range again. Fullerite, same thing here, pulling up from that comeback, but then these volumes are probably supplies that are putting pressure back on the price, and we're nowhere near that above 1,000 ISK from a year ago. Hypersynaptic fibers, here again, actually a little bit of a jump, and then that filling of these better prices by the market very quickly. But it's good to see, I would say, that at least there is a little bit of volatility. And this is showing that, again, in my opinion, the market is hesitating. Are we going to continue to see deflation, or are we finally going to start to form a bottom? And so from time to time you get players that decide to, I'm going to jump in, I'm going to buy a lot of this stuff, it's going to drive the price up a little bit. There's going to be supplies that are going to fill that gap, but you know, they're trying to call a bottom from time to time, like right here, phenolic composites 1250. All right, bound to be a bit of a bottom. People started to purchase, not really willing to dump at even lower prices, and look how the price shot back up to 2k. And then of course, what, 2k for phenolic composites, let's bring the supplies, and then we crash this back down. But we're holding at a price range of almost 1,500 for the sellers, 1,400 for the buyers, so we're definitely not at that bottom. Whoever pulled the trigger here, of course, is looking pretty good for now. Ceramic fibers, also a bit of a bottom forming, slow move back towards 350, not, you know, at the range from the first part of the chart, first half year, but definitely trying to get away from the bottom. Let's move on to Tick 2 ships, coming in at 44.10. So for Tick 2 ships, what I am personally looking at is volatility. And so here, for instance, the Basilisk Caldari ship, pretty damn good. Those advanced movements being super volatile seems to have translated in that as well. And this creates opportunity, of course, buy below 190, sell above 230. And you are looking at some very nice trades, which could have been done, as you can see on this chart, decently often. At the moment, we're recovering from our latest spike in early February to 230, and we're moving on our way back down. 203 million for the sellers, 182.5 for the buyers. So I would say if you want to have a chance at that trade, you want to try to grab a Basilisk now between the 183 and the 190 range, which is pretty much below the entire chart right here. It would make a lot of sense right now with all of that pressure. It's probably the right time to try and do so. Right? When you're seeing this chart go low, that means that from time to time there's got to be people that are dumping to these buyers as well. And so like a 185, I think you can definitely grab that. And then of course, that's the gamble. Will this pattern continue? Will you get a sell opportunity in the next couple of months? That's always an uncertainty, but for now, the Caldari ships have shown that volatility in a pretty sustained way. Cerberus, right, not as pronounced here in the middle period, but again, low points below 200 million, definitely purchasable. And then 250 and 280 are your high points, the places where you want to try to sell. I'd say that's a pretty nice margin. And at the moment, we're pretty high. We're still at 247 for the sellers, 224 for the buyers. So it's definitely still, right, if you happen to have bought in at a really good low price a couple of months ago, you can still try to sell at a profit. And then we get Guardian for Amar, where, all right, we get a little bit of a jump up. But the unfortunate thing is that I'm not seeing a continued volatility in the advanced movements and not in the Guardian either. We're just basically pulled up from the bottom range of around 180 million. Right now we're selling at 200, buyers are still at 180, and that's it. There is no sign that this is going to start to move in the same way as the Caldari ships. After that, we've got the Hound here, also unfortunately stabilizing below 25 million, 24.7, yeah, for the sellers, 21.5 for the buyers here. My feeling, I mean, this is just a feeling, is that unfortunately the Minmatar moon materials are also declining in volatility. So we saw that those bottoms were becoming higher and higher, and those high points were becoming lower and lower. And this is also probably going to start to translate into less volatility in the Minmatar ships that are basically settling at a below average range for now. So my tactic on this one would be wait for actually like 1 year low points before you jump in on Minmatar ships at the moment. Then we get the Iquitursa. We're keeping this one just to keep an eye on the Triglavian production cycle. Still very expensive, of course, at almost 800 million ISK. 780 for the sellers, 713 for the buyers. Just shows how hard it is to get the Triglavian components at the moment. And then we get the Ishtar doing a little bit of a bounce, a small bounce off of 200 million ISK, back up to 211 for the sellers, 194 for the buyers. And so for Galente, still a tricky one. We do have, this was a nice trade, right? Buy below 190, try to sell at 240, 230, 240. You do have a nice trade, but in general, we're also at a lower range for the Ishtar, which I just made a couple of videos about the ship. I love it, super versatile. I love it for exploration. It can basically do everything in a single fit, which is really amazing. It can be shield tank, can be armor tank. You get lots of options. This is basically one of those ships that's so all around that it's not as good for trading as, let's say, the Basilisk. That's very niche, and so big fights can get you the spike you need. Oversupplies, right? Miscalculation in industry can get you the buy opportunities. The Ishtar just has the volumes to soak up a lot of that volatility and just the general use across the board. That I'm seeing this one more as a gauge for what's happening with tick 2. All right, Ishtar under pressure. So here again, it starts to feel there's still some volatility in there, but the lower range is becoming a reality. Then the Manticore, Caldari, so better volatility, price spike up to 40 million ISK last month. We're still recovering from that one. The latest buy opportunities were at almost 20 million ISK, so here we're still at 28 for the sellers, 26 for the buyers. You're too much in the in-between spot here. I wouldn't touch it just yet. I'd wait and hope for more supplies to crash the price down and to be able to buy well below 25. The Munin had a bit of a better period, so this is again Minmatar. That lower range is basically what was shown here. Try to recover. We're already working our way back down to my feeling. 237 for the sellers, 197 for the buyers. That's a pretty sizable margin here. The volumes aren't there either. So I think a couple of buying sprees happen, and then a couple hundred chips already a buying spree in the Munin that are, have driven the price up a little bit, and it's just taking a little bit of time for this volume here to be absorbed by the market, but it's slowly happening. We're renormalizing to that lower range. Nemesis, Galente, so volatility, yes. Lower volatility than Caldari, unfortunately, yes as well, and a slight move to the lower range, but we're trying to, from time to time, right, a little bit of a plateau well above 25. We're trying to do something about that. It's just not really happening that well. 25 million for the sellers, 24 for the first buyer, 23 for the next one. So that shows quite a bit of interest at this current range. Then we've got the Oneros, Galente, and a bit of a comeback story, you could say, if you're looking for volatility. We're basically moving to that super low range of below 160 million, and we were able to stay there for several months, but then finally we have a little bit of volatility here, and this is already the third jump up that seems to be happening on renewed interest, because obviously the volumes have gone up substantially all of a sudden. So low point 160, you could have probably bought below 160, and now we're already selling again at 192. There's definitely a trade to be had here. 161 for the buyer. So the Oneros is really coming out of left field for me. I've always said at these low prices, sure, I would buy one, but I would not buy two. The volumes just aren't there for this ship. And now the volatility has shown up. So maybe having a couple of Oneroses would have been good to be able to take advantage of both this spike, and what's happening now. If you bought for like around 150 and you can sell at 190 and above 200, I think that's pretty damn impressive. After that, we've got the Panther staying below a billion. All right, I would say showing a little bit of that pressure for Tech 2, but there's definitely exceptions, right? The Caldari ones clearly showing that volatility is still there. Just above a billion for the sellers, 936 million for the buyers. Average price below a billion, so that's pretty low. Then we get a Purifier for Amar. Same thing as with the materials, I would say. Second half of the year, volatility was just gone. We moved to that lower range below 25 million for most of that period, and then here at the tail end, all right, a little bit of a surge, maybe a first little wave. Let's hope that it's the start, but I can't guarantee that, of course. 27 million for the sellers, 24 million for the buyers. Narrow margin around at 25 million. Yeah, it's just the situation for the Amar stuff. Scimitar, another logistics cruise that's finally making its way out of its bottom range of well below 200 million ISK, but not on enough volatility to really do a lot of trading here. 230 now for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. Then we get the Widow for Caldari, a bit more volatility in this one again, jumped down to less than a billion and finally recovered from that. 1.1 billion for the sellers, almost a billion for the buyers. And finally we've got the Zealot that also had that little surge for an Amar ship, but now supplies have already squashed our hopes. 200 million for the sellers, 181 for the buyers. Definitely again at that lower range, but in the ships you do have that first little wave show up here for the Amar ones, in the Zealot, in the Purifier, and in the Guardian. It's still rolling at the moment, but it's very timid, so there is no way to say that this is the start of more volatility for Amar in general. After that, we've got our Tech 3 ships coming in at 53.30. Here we were also, I think, stabilizing after a very nice prediction, I would say, for me personally, on the Confessor, where I did fully expect this increased price right here from 40 to 50 million. We're now stabilizing just below 50 million, 49 for the sellers, 44 for the buyers. Let's take a look at this. Fresh supplies, you know, almost a page, nothing above 10. That feels like it is well balanced to try and stabilize at the current price range. Next up here we get the Hecate, also stabilized below 50 million. ISK here 46 in fact to 48 for most sellers, so that's definitely in line with the Confessor. 44 for the buyers, in line with the Confessor. And supplies, you know, a little bit less here because of these lower prices. And then 2 days ago, again, one seller of 10. This feels like we've stabilized, we found this new price range. It's around 48 million, and the Hecate is here as well. Then we've got the Jackdaw that, actually working its way there, working its way up towards that 48 million range. 45 for the first seller, 47 for most. 44 million for the buyers, and here slightly more supply, but nothing that is going to blow this recovery. I think we will get through these ships and will recover at the 48 million range, which is going to be the new normal to start from, I would say, for these destroyers. And then this Vapel, the least popular one, is still bouncing above 45 million. 47.5 for the sellers, 43 million for the buyers. Bit more margin, also less supply, right? Last 24 hours, not that many ships coming in, which is normal, I would say, for the least popular one. So this to me feels like, all right, we're set. This is the new range, 48 million for most, a little bit less for this Vapel, potentially a bit more margin there, but that feels like it's in line. So after this, for the next few weeks, we'll have to keep an eye more on the volumes. What's happening? Is there one that is, all of a sudden seeing more demand or too much supply that's going to start to put pressure on these prices? Then you definitely want to sell. It's an interesting market to me, this tactical destroyer market, because I have been able to predict some of these moves decently consistently with just using what I would say is market logic. And as a result, now we're basically again looking for that next prediction, that next opportunity. You do always need an imbalance for that to happen. And so what was happening here was that the Confessor was at 40 million. There was basically supplies were drying up, but those buyers were still very low, 33 million-ish, something like that at this point. But the Hecate was already at 50, was drawing in all of the supplies. The Jackdaw was working its way up towards that 45 million. This breakout here was basically why I said the Confessor move after this is inevitable in January, and then this Vapel just kind of confirmed that as well by starting to go up here. And so yeah, that was that tactical destroyer prediction that did come true. No prediction this time because I think we're on the money. The market is saying this is the price range, we're well supplied, nothing too crazy in all of them. So here I think for now we're here to stay until a new imbalance shows up that is then potentially going to ripple through this market. For the cruiser stuff, you may already have seen that on the ticker, a volatile jump in the Tengu. Not sure how to explain that. This one to me does not feel like a nicely working market, but I think is a lot more manipulation and stuff like that happening. The Legion, for instance, pretty much no supplies, 159 for the sellers, 147 for the buyers. On an average price, the Loki, I think same thing. Yep, stabilized here at 191 million for the sellers, 171 for the buyers. Supplies non-existent, yet trades happen. Kind of weird, but here we go. Then we've got the Proteus that was doing okay, well above average, that's 180. The least popular one is currently selling for 159, so a bit of pressure all of a sudden on what? No supplies, but don't really have too much explanation for either moves here. And then finally we get the Tengu that's all of a sudden taking off like a freight train and is currently selling for 220 million, 185 for the sellers. Of course, there is supply that's taking advantage of this spike, but it's everything there is here, right? Last 24 hours, except for one sell order at 225. All of these are new ships. So to me, again, this feels like this could just be absolute manipulation. Someone buying up all the Tengus that's available. You don't need that big of a wallet, and starting to release that 225, trying to take a profit out of that. And so yeah, if you happen to have a cheap Tengu lying around that you don't need, you can definitely sell it at a nice premium at the moment. But this is unpredictable, and I really think that this is more of a manipulation attempt because of how much smaller this market actually is. And then finally, for the extra products coming in at 58.50, made it before an hour on this one. There's going to be two things. No, there's just going to be one thing actually. I'm going to take a look at the Marauders, of course, where CCP made an announcement. So that's battleships, advanced battleships, and instead of Black Ops, we've got the Marauders. Let's take a look at that. Interest has indeed peaked. Here is the Paladin going from actually a Mar, so that pressure, that slow, steady moving to that lower range. We went to 1.1 billion for a Paladin. And then all of a sudden the volumes are here, and we have shot back up to, well, there's none available, 2 billion is for a Paladin, please, 1.5 billion for the buyer. So I actually still need to do a little bit of exploration if I want to keep my wallet above 110 billion and buy that Marauder. I should have pulled the trigger a lot sooner, and I should have kept a closer eye on the market, because then I think in the Golem it's going to be even worse. Yeah, you could have bought for less than 125 billion. I could have bought it. I could have bought the hull just about a month ago, pretty easily, and now it's 1.9 billion for a Golem, 1.6 billion for the buyers. This is of course the CCP intervention, 1 year high point, super expensive all of a sudden. Very understandable, of course. Kronos was also at a 1 year low point of $1 billion round, and is now going for almost 1.6 billion, 60% increase in price here. And then the Vargar, I think, got like an extra buff, if I'm not mistaken. That one started out at a 1.1 billion range and is currently going for almost 1.7 billion ISK as well. And yeah, whoever can bring some Paladins to the market, I think you're looking at a very nice markup there, probably like 90% from stuff that was still trading here at the 1.1 billion range. So this is, right, that little news item, CCP rebalancing a ship that can have a big impact on the market, and we're seeing that right here in the Marauder market. And that to me, yeah, means that I was a little bit lazy. I've been trading for a Golem, I've been looking at the Golem, I've been hesitating, do I want to buy it? And so like last month I could have bought it, just with all of the exploration stuff that I found. Didn't do it, so now I'm too late, and I'm gonna have to pony up probably an extra 500 million or so at least if I'm going to buy the Golem in like a couple of weeks or something like that before the update. Not sure what I'm gonna do, because yeah, from 1 to 2 billion that is quite a big jump in the cost for a Marauder. But it's pretty cool that stuff like this can happen. Of course, CCP needs to keep the meta fresh, and I think the Marauders could use a little bit of help here. So overall, good news, and yeah, made them a lot more valuable all of a sudden. That's going to be it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.